The cruelest vows are the ones broken before the candles burn out. Claire Whitmore had imagined many things about her wedding night, but silence had never been one of them. The grand cathedral had emptied only an hour earlier, leaving behind fading music, scattered white petals, and the lingering scent of evergreen garlands woven around ancient stone pillars. Outside, gentle snow drifted across the castle courtyard, covering the footprints of hundreds of noble guests who had celebrated what they believed would become the kingdom's most admired union. Inside the newly prepared bridal chamber, dozens of candles painted warm golden light across polished oak furniture, embroidered curtains, and a magnificent fireplace that crackled softly against the winter air. Claire remained standing beside the window, her elegant ivory wedding gown flowing around her like fresh snow beneath moonlight. A delicate silver circlet rested upon her golden hair, while the lace veil her late mother had carefully preserved for years still covered her shoulders. She watched the snow fall without speaking. Every passing minute quietly stretched into another. The castle clock echoed through the corridor. 1 hour. Then another. No footsteps approached her door. No gentle knock broke the silence. Finally, distant laughter drifted through the hallway. At first she smiled, believing her husband must be returning after being delayed by guests. The smile disappeared the moment two young servant girls hurried past the chamber, unaware that the door stood slightly open. "I cannot believe he actually went there," one whispered. "He did not even come here first," the other answered softly. "Everyone is pretending not to notice." Claire slowly turned toward the doorway. Her heart tightened, though her face remained calm. She stepped into the quiet corridor just as an older housekeeper approached carrying folded linens. The woman stopped immediately, her expression filling with sympathy she struggled to hide. "My lady," she said gently. Claire forced a small smile. "Where is my husband?" The housekeeper lowered her eyes. She hesitated long enough to reveal the answer before speaking it aloud. "He is entertaining Lady Vivian Ashcroft in the East Wing." The words settled over Claire more heavily than the winter silence outside. She did not ask another question. She did not accuse anyone. She simply thanked the woman with quiet dignity before returning to the bridal chamber. The candles still flickered exactly as they had before. Nothing inside the room had changed, yet everything felt different. Claire slowly removed the silver circlet from her hair and placed it upon the dressing table. She traced one finger across the embroidery of her wedding sleeve, remembering how her mother had once whispered that love should make a woman feel safe rather than uncertain. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a single steady breath. Beyond the chamber walls, the celebration continued in smaller gatherings throughout the castle. Noble families laughed beside glowing fireplaces while musicians performed cheerful melodies in distant halls. None of them realized that the bride sat alone on the first night of her marriage. Eventually, another knock came at the door. This time it was not her husband. A young servant entered carrying untouched refreshments meant for the newlyweds. The frightened girl immediately realized only one person occupied the room. "My lady," she whispered nervously, "shall I leave these here?" Claire looked toward the tray before offering a gentle smile. "Please share them with the kitchen staff instead. They have worked much harder than I have today." The servant blinked in surprise. "Are you certain?" "Yes." Claire's voice remained soft. Warm food should never be wasted. The young servant thanked her quietly before leaving with the tray, glancing back only once with eyes filled with concern. Alone again, Claire crossed to the window. Snow continued falling beneath the moon, covering rooftops, gardens, and stone pathways in peaceful white. The world outside looked untouched, as though disappointment had never existed. Yet inside her heart something had quietly changed. She understood that dignity did not disappear simply because someone else failed to honor it. Hours later, the castle clock announced midnight. No footsteps came. No apology arrived. Claire reached for the folded traveling cloak resting across a nearby chair. It had belonged to her mother and had accompanied every difficult journey their family had ever faced. She wrapped it carefully around her shoulders before removing the jeweled necklace presented during the wedding ceremony. One by one, Each expensive ornament remained behind upon the dressing table until only the simple silver pendant her mother had given her as a child rested against her heart. She looked around the chamber one final time. The luxurious room no longer felt like the beginning of a future. It felt like a place where someone else's promises had quietly ended. Claire gently extinguished the nearest candle, leaving only moonlight streaming through the tall window. Before dawn reached the eastern sky, she had already made the decision that would change not only her own destiny, but the destiny of two kingdoms that had no idea a forgotten bride was about to walk away from everything they believed she would always accept. Before the first hint of dawn reached the eastern horizon, Claire Whitmore quietly closed the heavy wooden door behind her. The bridal chamber disappeared into silence as she stepped into the deserted corridor with nothing but her mother's wool cloak wrapped around her shoulders and a small leather satchel resting against her side. Every expensive gift, every jeweled ornament, and every reminder of the wedding remained behind. She carried only what belonged to the life she still recognized as her own. The castle felt strangely different now that the celebration had faded into scattered conversations and dying candlelight. Servants moved softly through distant hallways collecting empty silver trays while musicians packed away their instruments after a night that had begun with joyful promises and ended with whispers no one wished to repeat aloud. Claire descended the grand staircase carefully, her footsteps almost disappearing beneath the thick crimson carpet. Portraits of generations past watched silently from the stone walls, their painted eyes forever frozen upon a family that valued reputation above quiet kindness. She paused briefly beside the enormous front doors, where an elderly gatekeeper recognized her immediately. Surprise crossed his weathered face as he noticed her simple traveling cloak covering the elegant wedding gown beneath it. "My lady," he asked gently, "are you leaving so early?" Claire offered him the same warm smile she had shown him countless mornings before. "I have somewhere I need to go." The old man hesitated. "Should I send for an escort?" She slowly shook her head. "No. You have always been kind to me. Thank you for that." He lowered his head respectfully, understanding there were questions that did not need answers. Without another word, he opened the massive wooden doors. A wave of crisp winter air swept inside as Claire stepped into the snow-covered courtyard. The world beyond the castle walls looked peaceful, untouched by the disappointment hidden within the rooms behind her. Fresh snow covered the stone paths, softening every edge beneath the pale glow of the moon. Her footprints became the first marks upon the untouched white ground as she walked steadily toward the eastern gate. Behind her, the castle bells remained silent. No one called her name. No one came running after the forgotten bride. Claire reached the outer gate just as the first faint silver light began spreading across the distant horizon. The guards recognized her immediately and exchanged uncertain glances. One young soldier respectfully opened the gate without asking questions, sensing that dignity deserved silence more than curiosity. Beyond the castle stretched the old trade road winding through quiet forests and frozen meadows toward neighboring kingdoms. Claire pulled her cloak tighter against the cold and continued forward. She had no detailed plan beyond putting distance between herself and the place where promises had already lost their meaning. As the morning slowly awakened, birds began calling from snow-covered branches while gentle sunlight painted the distant hills with soft shades of gold. Claire stopped beside a small stone bridge crossing a narrow stream that still flowed beneath thin sheets of ice. She knelt to fill a small flask with clear water before sitting for a moment upon the weathered stones. She touched the silver pendant resting against her heart and remembered her mother's gentle words. "Never stay where your kindness is treated as weakness." The memory did not bring tears. Instead, it brought quiet determination. Far away, the sound of horses echoed across the frozen valley. Claire stood and looked toward the winding road. A royal procession slowly emerged through the morning mist. Powerful horses pulled polished carriages, while disciplined riders wearing dark cloaks surrounded them in perfect formation. Sunlight reflected from their silver insignias, revealing that they belonged not to the kingdom she had just left, but to its greatest neighboring rival. The procession gradually slowed as the lead rider noticed the solitary young woman standing peacefully beside the bridge in a wedding gown hidden beneath a traveling cloak. At the center of the formation rode a tall man whose calm gray eyes immediately settled upon Claire. Unlike the others, he did not seem surprised by her appearance. Instead, there was quiet curiosity in his expression, as though fate itself had unexpectedly placed someone important upon an otherwise ordinary road. Neither of them spoke. The winter breeze carried only the distant sound of flowing water and the quiet rhythm of horses approaching beneath the brightening sky. Somewhere beyond the snow-covered hills, Claire's old life was already becoming a memory. Ahead of her, a new path had just begun, though neither she nor the stranger leading the royal procession yet understood how completely their destinies were about to become intertwined. And if this story touches your heart, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss more unforgettable journeys still waiting ahead. Claire Whitmore remained motionless beside the ancient stone bridge as the royal procession gradually approached through the drifting veil of morning mist. Frost covered the bare branches overhead, and the quiet stream beneath the bridge reflected the first pale rays of sunrise like liquid silver. The rhythmic sound of horses slowed until the lead rider gently raised one hand, signaling the entire escort to stop. Dozens of disciplined royal guards brought their mounts to a calm halt without a single unnecessary word. Their dark cloaks stirred softly in the winter breeze, and polished armor shimmered beneath the growing light. Claire instinctively stepped aside to allow the travelers to continue, lowering her eyes out of simple courtesy rather than fear. She had no desire to attract attention. Her thoughts remained fixed on putting more distance between herself and the castle she had left behind before dawn. Yet she noticed that no one moved forward. Instead, the rider at the center of the procession slowly dismounted. He stood well over 6 feet tall, carrying himself with quiet confidence rather than arrogance. A dark wool cloak rested across finely crafted leather armor, while a silver crest fastened near his shoulder caught the morning sun. His gray eyes studied Claire with calm curiosity, never lingering upon the expensive embroidery still visible beneath her traveling cloak, but instead upon the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. He approached only close enough to speak comfortably, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Good morning," he said in a warm, measured voice. "You appear to have been traveling alone for some time." Claire offered a polite nod. "Good morning, sir. Only since last night." The stranger glanced briefly toward the empty roads stretching behind her. "These roads are peaceful today, but winter journeys can become difficult. Are you headed toward family?" Claire hesitated before answering honestly. "I do not know where I am headed yet. Only that I needed to leave." He did not press for details. Instead, he looked toward the leather satchel resting against her shoulder, and then toward the delicate silver pendant she absent-mindedly held in one hand. There was sadness in her expression, but not bitterness. That distinction quietly captured his attention. Before he could speak again, one of the younger guards rode forward carrying a small blanket. The horse beneath him shifted nervously after stepping upon a patch of hidden ice near the edge of the bridge. The frightened animal pulled slightly against the reins, causing a wooden supply chest fastened behind the saddle to slip sideways. Without thinking, Claire immediately stepped closer, speaking softly to the horse in a calm, reassuring voice. Her gentle hand rested lightly against its neck while she patiently waited for the animal to settle. Within moments, the horse relaxed completely, lowering its head as though recognizing familiar kindness. The young guard released a relieved breath. "Thank you," he said gratefully. He has never liked icy roads. Claire smiled. He was frightened, not stubborn. The tall stranger watched the entire exchange in thoughtful silence. Most people standing beside an armed royal escort would have backed away from a nervous horse. Claire had done the opposite, offering comfort before considering herself. One of the older commanders quietly leaned toward the stranger and murmured, "She has a gift with animals." The man nodded almost imperceptibly. "So I noticed." He turned back toward Claire. "May I ask your name?" "Claire Whitmore." "I am Adrian." He offered only his first name, giving no title and making no effort to reveal his position. Claire appreciated the simplicity. "It is nice to meet you, Adrian." A faint smile appeared on his face. It had been a long time since someone had addressed him without ceremony. "Would you accept breakfast before continuing your journey?" he asked. Claire hesitated. She disliked accepting favors from strangers, yet she realized she had eaten nothing since the wedding feast she had barely touched the previous evening. "Only if it does not inconvenience your company." Adrian glanced toward one of the attendants, who immediately unpacked fresh bread, warm broth carried inside insulated flasks, dried fruit, and hot herbal tea. Claire accepted only a small portion, thanking each servant individually as they handed her the simple meal. Even while hungry, she noticed an elderly driver standing farther back with nothing prepared for himself. Without hesitation, she divided her bread in half and quietly walked toward him. "Please," she said with a gentle smile. "You have been traveling longer than I have." The elderly man looked surprised before accepting the gesture with sincere gratitude. Adrian watched silently once more. Everything she did seemed effortless, as though generosity had become part of her nature rather than something she displayed when others were watching. As sunlight slowly spread across the snowy valley, neither Claire nor Adrian realized that this quiet breakfast beside an old stone bridge marked the first page of a story that would eventually reshape two rival kingdoms and challenge everything either of them believed about fate, loyalty, and the unexpected ways that true love often begins. The morning sun climbed higher above the snow-covered hills, washing the frozen valley in gentle golden light as the royal procession resumed its journey. Claire Whitmore had accepted Adrian's invitation to travel with the company until they reached the next village, believing it would be safer than continuing alone through unfamiliar roads. She rode inside a modest carriage prepared for honored guests, though she still felt more comfortable sitting beside the window than leaning against the luxurious cushions. Every few minutes she glanced outside at the endless forests wrapped in fresh snow, watching quiet deer disappear among towering pine trees while birds circled above the bright winter landscape. The peaceful rhythm of the horses gradually eased the heaviness that had settled inside her heart during the previous night. Across the procession, Adrian rode at the front with effortless confidence, occasionally exchanging brief instructions with his commanders while maintaining a steady pace along the narrow mountain road. Although he rarely looked toward the carriage, he remained quietly aware of its position at every turn. He had met countless nobles throughout his life, yet there had been something unexpectedly genuine about the young woman he had encountered beside the old bridge. She had asked for nothing, expected nothing, and still found ways to care for complete strangers. Such qualities were remarkably rare among those born into privilege. Several hours later, the procession reached a small village marketplace nestled between rolling hills. Local merchants immediately paused their work as the royal escort entered the square. Bakers carried fresh loaves from stone ovens while children laughed beside a frozen fountain decorated with evergreen branches. Adrian ordered the procession to stop so the horses could rest before continuing the journey. Claire quietly stepped from the carriage and wandered only a short distance toward a small fruit stand where an elderly widow struggled to gather apples that had rolled across the snowy ground after a wooden basket tipped over. Without hesitation, Claire knelt beside her, carefully collecting each piece of fruit and brushing away the snow before placing them back into the basket. The grateful woman smiled warmly. "Thank you, my dear." Most travelers hurry past without noticing. Claire returned the smile. "My mother always said kindness takes less time than regret." Nearby villagers quietly observed the exchange, unaware that the elegantly dressed rider speaking with local officials was one of the most powerful rulers in the region. Adrian noticed Claire helping the elderly merchant before anyone else reached her. Once again, she had acted before anyone asked. One of his senior advisors approached quietly. "My lord," he said in a low voice, "shall we inform the young lady of your identity before we continue?" Adrian remained thoughtful for a moment. "Not yet." The advisor looked surprised. "You prefer she does not know?" Adrian nodded. "For now, I would rather she continues speaking to me exactly as she has from the beginning." The advisor smiled knowingly before stepping back. Moments later, Claire returned carrying a small paper bundle. She approached Adrian with gentle hesitation. "I hope you do not mind," she said. "The baker insisted I accept these fresh rolls after helping his neighbor. There are too many for one person." She offered the bundle toward him. Adrian accepted it with genuine appreciation rather than royal formality. "Then perhaps we should share them." They sat together on a simple wooden bench overlooking the village square while the guards prepared fresh supplies for the road ahead. Children chased one another through the snow nearby, laughing freely beneath the bright winter sky. Claire noticed a little girl watching the warm bread with quiet longing. Without speaking, she walked over and handed the child half of her portion. The girl's grateful smile brightened the entire square. Adrian observed the moment silently. He realized Claire gave away nearly everything she received, not because she possessed abundance, but because generosity had become her first instinct. As the procession prepared to depart once more, distant riders suddenly appeared upon the northern road carrying the crest of Claire's former kingdom. They slowed after spotting the unfamiliar royal escort resting in the village. Their leader studied the elegant carriage, then briefly recognized Claire standing nearby. Surprise crossed his face before he quickly turned his horse back toward the road from which they had come. Adrian followed the exchange with quiet attention. "Do you know them?" he asked calmly after the riders disappeared into the distance. Claire lowered her eyes. "They come from the kingdom I left this morning." Adrian understood there was more to the story than she wished to share. He offered no further questions. Instead, he opened the carriage door himself and gestured politely toward the seat waiting inside. "The road ahead is long," he said with a reassuring smile. "You should not have to walk it alone." Claire met his calm gray eyes for the first time since leaving the bridge. Something about his quiet confidence made the unfamiliar journey feel a little less uncertain. She stepped into the carriage, unaware that the riders disappearing beyond the snowy hills were already carrying news that the forgotten bride had been seen traveling beside the mysterious leader of a rival royal procession. A report that would soon reach every noble court before another sunset arrived. The royal procession continued across the northern roads as the afternoon sun slowly drifted behind towering evergreen forests, casting long golden shadows across the snow-covered landscape. Claire Whitmore sat quietly inside the carriage, watching frost gather along the edges of the window while distant mountains gradually rose against the pale blue sky. Although she had traveled only a single day from the castle she once believed would become her home, it already felt impossibly far away. Each passing mile seemed to loosen another invisible thread tying her to the painful memories of the previous night. Outside, Adrian rode beside the carriage instead of remaining farther ahead with his commanders. He occasionally exchanged brief conversations with his officers, yet his attention frequently returned to the road beside Claire's window, making certain the journey remained comfortable without drawing attention to his concern. Late in the afternoon, the procession reached an ancient stone fortress overlooking a broad frozen valley. Massive iron gates slowly opened as royal guards standing atop the walls saluted the arriving company with disciplined precision. Claire looked through the carriage window with quiet amazement. Colorful banners fluttered above elegant towers, while warm smoke rose from dozens of chimneys into the crisp winter air. The fortress felt less like a military stronghold and more like a welcoming home built to protect everyone living within its walls. As the carriage rolled into the central courtyard, servants immediately hurried forward, not with anxious haste, but with practiced kindness. Stable hands gently guided the horses away while attendants carried fresh blankets and warm drinks for the travelers returning from the long journey. Claire noticed something unusual almost immediately. Every servant greeted Adrian with genuine affection rather than fearful obedience. Children playing near the fountains smiled brightly when they saw him. Elderly workers bowed respectfully, yet several also exchanged warm words with him as though greeting someone they deeply trusted. Claire quietly wondered who this remarkable traveler truly was. Adrian approached the carriage and opened the door himself before any servant reached it. "We will remain here tonight," he said with a reassuring smile. "You are welcome to rest before deciding where your journey continues tomorrow." Claire stepped onto the snow-covered stones and looked around the peaceful courtyard. "Thank you." I have already accepted more kindness than I expected. Adrian shook his head gently. Kindness is never something that should be measured. Before Claire could answer, a little boy carrying a wooden toy horse came running across the courtyard. Your Majesty, he called excitedly before suddenly stopping as though realizing he had spoken too loudly. Claire turned instinctively toward Adrian. The boy's mother hurried after him and respectfully lowered her head. Forgive him, Your Majesty. Time seemed to pause. Claire slowly looked back at the man she had known only as Adrian. He met her surprised gaze with a calm expression, offering a small apologetic smile. I hoped you would learn my title after getting to know the person. Claire stood speechless for several moments. You are the Alpha King. Adrian inclined his head. Alexander Adrian Hawthorne. She immediately began to bow, embarrassed that she had spoken to him so casually throughout the day. Before she could lower herself completely, Adrian gently lifted one hand. Please do not. Claire looked up, uncertain. Your Majesty, I did not know. Exactly, he answered kindly. And, because you did not know, every kind word you offered today was completely genuine. His voice remained warm and free of judgment. You treated everyone the same, whether they wore armor, simple clothing, or a crown. That tells me more about your character than any formal introduction ever could. Claire felt both relieved and humbled. I never intended disrespect. You never showed any. Adrian smiled. Only honesty. Nearby servants quietly resumed their work while pretending not to listen, though many exchanged knowing smiles. They had rarely seen their king speak so openly with a guest. As evening approached, Claire was escorted to a comfortable chamber overlooking the inner gardens. Fresh flowers rested beside the window despite the winter season, and a small fire already warmed the room. She thanked every servant individually before they departed, leaving her alone with peaceful silence for the first time since dawn. Meanwhile, inside the fortress council chamber, one of Adrian's advisors entered carrying a sealed letter delivered by fast rider only moments earlier. Your Majesty, he said gravely, news has arrived from the southern kingdom. Adrian accepted the letter and quietly broke the wax seal. As he read the carefully written message, his expression became thoughtful. The report confirmed exactly what he had suspected. The young woman sleeping peacefully under his protection was not simply an ordinary traveler. She was the bride who had disappeared before sunrise, and her disappearance had already become the most discussed scandal spreading through every noble court in the neighboring kingdoms. Adrian folded the letter carefully and placed it upon the table without speaking. Looking toward the window where snow continued falling across the fortress walls, he made one silent decision. Whatever storms followed the rumors racing across the kingdoms, Claire Whitmore would not face them alone again. The first rays of morning sunlight spilled across the stone walls of Hawthorne Fortress, turning the snow-covered courtyard into a sea of shimmering gold. Claire Whitmore opened the tall window of her guest chamber and breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the crisp winter air. For the first time in many months, perhaps even years, she woke without hearing servants rushing through hallways preparing for endless expectations placed upon her. The fortress seemed peaceful, almost strangely ordinary despite belonging to one of the most powerful rulers in the neighboring kingdoms. Below her window, gardeners carefully swept fresh snow from winding pathways, while children of castle workers laughed together beside a small frozen fountain. No one hurried. No one shouted. Every person seemed to move with quiet purpose rather than fear. Claire wrapped her mother's wool cloak around her shoulders before leaving the chamber. She quietly thanked every servant she passed, surprising them with the same gentle smile she had offered since arriving. One elderly housekeeper finally gathered enough courage to ask, "My lady, is there anything more we may prepare for your comfort?" Claire shook her head kindly. "You have already done more than enough. May I help instead?" The older woman blinked in surprise before smiling warmly. Guests rarely ask such questions. Claire simply answered, "Perhaps they should." A short time later, she wandered into the castle gardens, where evergreen hedges framed quiet walking paths surrounding a peaceful glass greenhouse. Inside, despite the snow outside, delicate white roses and winter lilies bloomed beneath carefully tended warmth. Claire knelt beside one of the flower beds after noticing a broken watering jug left near the entrance. She quietly repaired its loose leather handle using a simple knot she had learned from her mother years earlier. As she finished, she heard calm footsteps approaching across the stone path. Adrian stood just outside the greenhouse, carrying 2 cups of warm herbal tea. "I wondered where our guest had disappeared," he said with a gentle smile. Claire accepted 1 cup gratefully. "Your gardens are beautiful." Adrian looked around the greenhouse before answering. "My mother planted the first flowers here." She believed every fortress should protect beauty as carefully as it protects its people. Claire smiled softly. "She sounds very wise." Adrian's expression grew thoughtful. She was. For several quiet moments, they simply walked together among the blooming flowers while sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling overhead. Claire eventually noticed several young apprentice gardeners struggling to move a heavy wooden planter across the stone floor. Without hesitation, she handed Adrian her cup and walked over to help them. Together, they carefully repositioned the planter beneath better sunlight. The children thanked her repeatedly before returning to their work with cheerful excitement. Adrian watched from several feet away, once again seeing the same pattern repeat itself. Claire never looked for recognition. She simply noticed what needed to be done. As they continued their walk, Adrian finally spoke the question that had quietly remained in his thoughts since the previous day. "May I ask why you left without taking anything that belonged to your new household?" Claire looked down at the warm tea resting between her hands. "Because none of it was truly mine." Adrian remained silent, allowing her to continue only if she wished. After a long pause, she said quietly, "Respect cannot be packed into a travel bag. Neither can trust. Those were the only things I hoped to bring with me after my wedding." She smiled gently, though sadness briefly touched her eyes. "When I realized they were already gone, the jewelry no longer mattered." Adrian looked at her with growing admiration. Few people could speak about disappointment without bitterness. Claire somehow managed exactly that. Before either could continue, one of the royal messengers hurried across the garden carrying another sealed letter marked with the crest of the Southern Kingdom. He respectfully bowed before Adrian. "Your Majesty." This message arrived only moments ago. Adrian accepted the letter and quietly read its contents. His calm expression remained unchanged, yet his advisors standing nearby immediately recognized that the news carried significance. The message confirmed that Claire's former husband and several powerful nobles had begun searching neighboring kingdoms, not out of concern for Claire's well-being, but because rumors of her disappearance beside a rival Alpha King had already begun spreading throughout every royal court. Adrian carefully folded the letter before looking toward Claire, who stood peacefully admiring the winter roses without any knowledge of the conversations unfolding around her. In that quiet moment, he understood something with complete certainty. Fate had not placed Claire upon the snowy road by accident. The choice he made next would influence not only her future, but the fragile peace between kingdoms whose leaders were already beginning to watch every step either of them might take. Morning gradually gave way to afternoon as preparations quietly transformed Hawthorne Fortress for the arrival of distinguished visitors from neighboring kingdoms. Snow still rested upon the castle walls, but banners bearing the royal crest fluttered proudly above the towers as servants arranged long tables inside the magnificent audience hall. Claire Whitmore had spent the early hours helping several elderly attendants decorate the room with winter flowers gathered from the greenhouse, insisting on carrying baskets herself despite every attempt to persuade her to rest. More than once the servants gently reminded her that honored guests were never expected to work beside the household staff. Claire answered each reminder with the same gentle smile. "Helping does not become less important simply because someone calls me a guest." Before long, her quiet kindness had spread through the fortress. Stable workers greeted her warmly as she crossed the courtyard. Kitchen staff saved her a warm loaf of fresh bread before lunch without being asked. Even the youngest pages smiled whenever she passed, sensing something peaceful about her presence. None of those small moments escaped Adrian Hawthorne. From the upper gallery overlooking the courtyard, he watched Claire kneel beside an elderly gardener whose hands had grown stiff from the winter cold. She patiently helped him tie protective cloth around delicate rose bushes before thanking him for teaching her the proper way to care for winter blooms. The old gardener laughed softly and shook his head. "Your Grace, you should be teaching us how to remain so cheerful." Claire laughed with him, though she quietly corrected him. "Please call me Claire." Adrian smiled to himself before turning toward his chief advisor. "Do you notice what happens whenever she enters a room?" The older man nodded thoughtfully. "People become calmer." Adrian remained silent for several moments. "Exactly." His thoughts were interrupted when a royal messenger entered carrying another sealed document. "Your Majesty," the messenger announced respectfully, "delegates from the Southern Kingdom have crossed the eastern border. They request permission to attend tomorrow's council gathering." Adrian accepted the letter and read it carefully. The message remained polite, yet its purpose was unmistakable. Claire's disappearance had become a matter of public interest among the noble courts, and several influential families wished to learn whether the rumors surrounding the Alpha King were true. Adrian calmly folded the letter. "They will be welcomed with every courtesy." The advisor looked at him carefully. "Including Lord Edmund Ashford?" Adrian nodded. "Especially him." By late afternoon, the great audience hall glowed with warm candlelight reflecting from polished marble floors and towering stained glass windows. Claire entered quietly carrying a basket of evergreen branches requested by the decorators. She immediately noticed Adrian studying a large map placed across the council table. For a brief moment, she considered leaving without disturbing him, but he looked up and smiled before she could turn away. "Would you join me for a walk?" he asked. Claire hesitated only briefly before agreeing. Together they crossed the castle gardens where fresh snow crunched gently beneath their boots. The winter air carried the scent of pine and cedar, while the distant mountains shimmered beneath soft afternoon light. Neither hurried to speak. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than uncertain. Eventually Adrian stopped beside the frozen lake overlooking the valley below. "There is something you deserve to know," he said quietly. Claire looked toward him with calm attention. "The neighboring kingdoms already know you are here." She lowered her eyes for a moment before answering. "I thought they might. Some people will misunderstand why you traveled with my escort." Claire nodded gently. People often decide what they believe before asking for the truth. Adrian studied her thoughtful expression. "Does that frighten you?" She considered the question carefully before answering. "No. It saddens me. But fear has already taken enough from my life." Those simple words settled into the quiet afternoon. Adrian realized she was stronger than many warriors he had commanded, not because she possessed great physical strength, but because disappointment had never convinced her to abandon compassion. As they turned back toward the fortress, the distant sound of ceremonial trumpets echoed across the snowy valley. One after another, elegant royal carriages began appearing upon the winding mountain road below. Flags from powerful noble houses fluttered above them, announcing the arrival of guests invited to tomorrow's council gathering. Claire watched the long procession climb steadily toward the castle gates, unaware that among those visitors traveled the very man who had abandoned her only one night before. Carrying hopes of reclaiming the future he had carelessly thrown away before realizing someone else had already begun to recognize the extraordinary worth he had failed to see. Evening settled gently over Hawthorne Fortress as hundreds of candles illuminated the towering audience hall with warm golden light. Snow continued drifting beyond the stained glass windows, softening the rugged mountains surrounding the castle, while noble guests from neighboring kingdoms gathered beneath richly embroidered banners. Claire Whitmore paused quietly outside the great hall before entering. She wore a graceful deep blue gown selected by the castle attendants, elegant yet simple enough to reflect the quiet humility that had never left her heart. The silver pendant from her mother still rested against her neck, hidden beneath the fabric as a reminder of the life that had shaped her long before royal courts had learned her name. Across the hall, Adrian Hawthorne welcomed each visiting lord and lady with calm courtesy. His presence filled the room without demanding attention, and every guest instinctively recognized the quiet authority carried by the Alpha King. Though surrounded by diplomats and advisors, his eyes briefly found Claire as she entered. He offered a reassuring smile, one so natural that it eased the nervousness she had tried to hide throughout the afternoon. Claire returned the smile before moving toward a quieter corner of the hall, wishing to avoid becoming the center of conversation. Her hope lasted only a few moments. Soft whispers began spreading through the assembled nobles as more guests recognized her face. Some remembered seeing her during the wedding celebration only 2 days earlier. Others had already heard exaggerated stories carried across the kingdoms by merchants and royal messengers. Curious glances followed her wherever she walked. Yet Claire neither hurried nor lowered her head. She greeted every servant politely, thanked musicians after each performance, and offered respectful smiles to elderly guests who approached her with kindness. Before long, the enormous entrance doors opened once more. A herald announced the arrival of the southern delegation. The hall gradually fell silent as several distinguished nobles entered beneath richly embroidered cloaks bearing the crest of Claire's former kingdom. At their center walked Lord Edmund Ashford, the man who had abandoned his bride on the night of their wedding. His confident expression faltered the instant he saw Claire standing peacefully inside the rival king's fortress. For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. Edmund had expected to find a heartbroken woman desperate to return home. Instead, he found someone standing with quiet dignity, surrounded by people who treated her with genuine respect. Claire acknowledged his presence with a polite nod before returning her attention to an elderly duchess asking about the flowers decorating the hall. She refused to let bitterness shape the moment. Edmund slowly approached after excusing himself from the delegation. "Claire," he said softly. She turned toward him with calm composure. "Good evening, Lord Ashford." The formal greeting surprised him. There was no anger in her voice, only respectful distance. "I have been looking for you," he admitted. Claire answered gently. "You have found me." Edmund hesitated, searching for words that had not existed when they might have mattered most. "You left without saying anything." Claire held his gaze steadily. There was very little left to say. Before the conversation could continue, Adrian crossed the hall after concluding discussions with several visiting rulers. He greeted Edmund with perfect diplomatic courtesy. "Lord Ashford, welcome to Hawthorne Fortress." Edmund bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty." Adrian looked briefly toward Claire before returning his attention to the visiting noble. "Miss Whitmore has been our honored guest since arriving safely within our borders." The emphasis on the word safely carried quiet meaning without accusation. Edmund nodded stiffly. "I appreciate your hospitality." Adrian smiled politely. Every traveler deserves kindness. Around them, nobles quietly observed the exchange, sensing that something important was unfolding beneath the calm conversation. Claire remained silent, unwilling to deepen old wounds through public disagreement. Adrian noticed her discomfort and gently shifted the discussion toward matters of diplomacy, allowing her the opportunity to step away with dignity. She moved toward the long windows overlooking the moonlit gardens, grateful for the fresh silence beyond the crowd. After several minutes, Adrian joined her, carrying 2 cups of warm herbal tea just as he had on the morning they first walked together. He handed one to her without speaking. Claire accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you." They stood side by side watching snowflakes drift across the quiet courtyard below. Finally, Adrian spoke in his calm, reassuring voice. "No matter what conversations take place inside these walls tomorrow, remember one thing." Claire looked toward him. "What is that?" Adrian's expression remained steady. "No one here will decide your future except you." Those simple words settled gently into her heart. For the first time since leaving the wedding behind, Claire realized she was no longer being carried by someone else's choices. She had reached a place where her own voice finally mattered, and before another sunrise arrived, every noble gathered beneath Hawthorne Fortress would witness a decision capable of changing not only her future, but the future of 2 kingdoms forever. Morning arrived beneath a sky of brilliant winter blue as Hawthorne Fortress welcomed the assembled nobles into the great audience hall for the royal council. Sunlight poured through towering stained glass windows, scattering vibrant colors across polished marble floors, while banners from neighboring kingdoms hung side by side in a rare display of diplomacy. Claire Whitmore entered quietly beside the attendants, choosing a place near the edge of the gathering rather than the center. She had no desire to become the focus of another public spectacle. Her simple grace attracted enough attention without seeking it. Adrian Hawthorne took his place upon the elevated platform reserved for the Alpha King, greeting every delegation with measured courtesy before inviting the council to begin. Discussions concerning trade, winter supplies, and border cooperation filled the opening hour. Claire listened silently, grateful that no one had mentioned her name. That piece ended when Lord Edmund Ashford respectfully requested permission to address the gathering. Adrian granted it with a calm nod. Edmund stepped into the center of the hall, his voice steady but noticeably restrained. He acknowledged the assembled rulers before turning toward Claire. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I have come to ask that you return to your homeland with me so that we may restore what has been damaged." A quiet murmur spread through the audience. Claire remained still for several moments before meeting his eyes. "What exactly do you wish to restore?" Edmund hesitated. "Our future," Claire answered gently rather than harshly. "A future is built through daily choices. On the night we promised to begin ours together, you made yours. Before sunrise, I made mine." The hall fell completely silent. There was no anger in her voice, only calm honesty. Edmund lowered his gaze. "I understand that I failed you." Claire nodded with quiet compassion. "I hope one day you will become the kind of man who never places another woman in the position you placed me. I sincerely wish you that growth. But I cannot return to a life that began with broken trust." Her words carried neither revenge nor humiliation. They simply spoke the truth. Adrian watched her with deep respect. She had been offered the perfect opportunity to embarrass the man who had wounded her, yet she chose dignity over triumph. Several elder nobles exchanged thoughtful glances, recognizing that true strength often appeared in the gentlest voices. Edmund slowly inclined his head. "Then I accept your decision." He stepped back without further argument, understanding that respect required accepting an answer he did not want to hear. Adrian rose from his seat and descended the platform, stopping beside Claire rather than above her. He addressed the council with calm authority. "Every kingdom represented here values honor. Honor means allowing each person the freedom to choose the path before them. Miss Whitmore arrived within my borders seeking nothing except peace. She has been treated as our honored guest, and she will continue to receive that respect for as long as she desires." His words echoed through the hall with quiet certainty. No one challenged them. Adrian then turned toward Claire, speaking only to her. "The decision remains entirely yours. Whether you leave tomorrow, remain here as a guest, or build an entirely different future, no one will make that choice except you." Claire felt unexpected emotion rise within her heart. For the first time in many years, someone with great power had offered her freedom instead of obligation. She smiled, her eyes bright with gratitude rather than sorrow. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not for rescuing me, but for reminding me that my life still belongs to me." Adrian returned the smile. "It always did." Outside the fortress, the winter clouds slowly parted as brilliant sunlight spread across the snow-covered valley below. Bells rang from the castle towers, not to celebrate a wedding or announce a victory, but simply to welcome a new day. Claire stepped onto the balcony overlooking the peaceful kingdom, breathing deeply as the crisp mountain air filled her lungs. The painful chapter that had begun in silence on a lonely wedding night had not ended with revenge. It had ended with self-respect, compassion, and the courage to walk toward a future she had chosen for herself. Beside her stood a king who understood that loyalty could never be demanded and love could never be forced. Both had to be freely given. As they looked across the bright horizon together, the snow reflected the morning light like countless tiny stars, and for the first time since leaving the castle before dawn, Claire no longer felt like the forgotten girl someone had abandoned. She felt like the author of the next chapter of her own story, and that quiet realization became the greatest victory of all.